All right, hello and welcome to Eviction 101, Renters' Rights and Resources. My name is Eric Halverson. I work for Partnership Health Center, and we are here today with all of the wonderful experts you see on screen now, here to talk to you about the resources in your community to navigate housing challenges. Our goal today is to provide useful information and valuable resources for folks in our community facing any assortment of housing challenges, especially as it relates to renting. We want anybody viewing on Facebook Live today to be sure to chime in with any questions you might have in the comments section for these experts. And we also want you to know that we'll be posting this video both as a whole and individual presentation sections on YouTube, our Facebook pages, and probably some of our websites after the fact. So you'll be able to access this resource anytime. I do want to say that Partnership Health Center is really proud to host this conversation. We are your community health center, and while we provide an assortment of healthcare resources to about 16,000 Missoulians, regardless of ability to pay, we also know that healthcare doesn't start and end in the doctor's office, that things like housing really affect overall health and well-being, which is why we're interested in this topic and working hard on it. So if anybody walks away with a key takeaway about Partnership Health Center, I sure hope you know that you have a great community health center in your community. And what that means is that great health care, dental care, behavioral health, pharmacy, and so much more truly is within reach. Again, we never deny access to care due to inability to pay, and we will really work with you to make sure that you get the care that you deserve. So with that, I want to thank every guest here for coming on again, and I'm going to remove everybody from the screen except for our first guest, who is Alex Ramsing of Homeword. Alex, I think you're on mute if you want to unmute yourself. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Alex, before we start, I do want to mention that all the resources that we'll be talking about today are available on Partnership Health Center's website. And with that, I will turn it over to you to talk about renting.
Yeah, so I work for Homeword, a nonprofit in Missoula, and Homeword uses sustainable methods to strengthen Montana communities by both teaching homebuyer education, financial skill building, and also creating safe and healthy homes that people can afford. So Homeword has two main aspects to it. One is an education side, and the other is actually building homes that Montanans can afford. So my main job here, I am the landlord liaison at Homeword. I teach a class called the Rent-Wise Workshop, which is a pretty holistic class. I go over everything from credit to some behavioral stuff, communicating with your landlord, understanding the lease, and things like that. The other part of my job is I help support landlords in order to keep folks in their homes through something called the Property Partner Program. So the Property Partner Program is essentially a program that I run where any landlord who chooses to reduce barriers for folks who take my workshop, I am there to support them in the long run. So moving right along, tips for avoiding conflicts with landlords. The main thing that I can recommend people do is to read and understand the lease. And this is something you'll want to do before you move into a new home. Taking that time to read the lease, if you're worried about that first interaction with a landlord where you drop off your check, pick up your keys, sign the lease. If you're worried that you're going to be rushed through that potentially, you can always ask in advance for a copy of the lease. Usually landlords will have that in some sort of digital format that you can just read through either on your computer or on your phone or something like that. Just so if you do have any questions, you can bring those questions up at the lease signing. The main tip that I have for avoiding any sort of conflict with a landlord is communication. Communication is king. If a landlord asks for a response, respond, be that either phone or email or text, however they mostly prefer. And the reason for that too is landlords are responsible for emergency repair. And if you're not communicating with your landlord that something is wrong, if one day you come home and you find out that your roof is leaking, it's not your responsibility to go out and get, quotes for a new roof. that is your landlord's responsibility to fix the roof. So making sure to communicate with your landlord that something like that is happening is really important. And then finally, guest policy is another really big one where folks can run into a lot of trouble. Knowing how long a guest can stay at the home, or making sure not to bring over guests that might be unruly, because folks are responsible for their guests that go to your home as well. So the next one, how to resolve conflicts with landlords. Potentially, there's always mediation. There's a company or a nonprofit in the Solstice building where Homeword is located called the Community Dispute Resolution Center, or the CDRC. That could be a potential avenue to go. They do have a sliding scale for payments as well. And the other recommendation that I have for resolving conflicts is to really get everything in writing if you can, just for your own personal reference and then for the long run as well. To go back to the leaky roof scenario, if you have called your landlord and said, hey, the roof's leaking, can we get this fixed? And say they're slow to react or slow to make that fix, you can always respond with a text or an email. And that way you have that written proof that you have been reaching out and communicating with your landlord. And then finally, to talk about understanding the landlord's perspective. At the end of the day, landlords want tenants that are going to respect the property and pay rent on time. Are you going to pay rent on time? Are you going to take care of the place? So my major point is to not make any major changes to the home, and then be ready to potentially lose some of the deposit for minor changes. So, if you hung up a shelf over here or put nails in the walls to hang something up, just be ready that potentially they might take that out of your deposit in the long run. And then major changes. I have a story from a couple of years ago where I was renting with some roommates, and they really wanted to dig a fire pit in the backyard. That is a great example of a major change that you definitely don't want to do. Luckily I was able to talk them out of that in the long run, which was really great. But make sure to avoid any sort of major changes, and then be ready for potentially being charged for some smaller stuff as well. And it'll really depend landlord to landlord as well. And then the last thing to talk about real quick, just really briefly, are the top 4 resources for any renters. If you are running into any sort of trouble financially, there's resources through 211, 549 Hope, Salvation Army, and then currently, because of the COVID pandemic, the Montana Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and that can actually be filled out on behalf of the renter, by the landlord, or through the renter themselves. Thanks so much for having me today, and I will pass it back.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. I want everybody to know, too, that all these, I just put the website at the bottom banner here. Alex is kind enough to provide all the resources he just mentioned to us, so you can find all of those and links to the top 4 resources there at that web page. And also remind everybody that if you have any questions for our experts as we move through their presentations, please do go ahead and comment on Facebook Live, and we can address those questions in real time. I encourage you to take advantage of the experts while we've got them all here in one place. Thanks again, Alex. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you in the Q&A at the very end. Great. Let me get these things moved around. And next, we'll be talking about Eviction Law 101. So for that conversation, I'd like to bring a few wonderful experts onto the stream. Today, we are speaking, again, as a reminder, we're speaking to local experts about eviction, renters' rights, and housing-related resources across Missoula. Our next expert guests are attorneys with several attorneys with helpful insights into how you can and should respond to an eviction notice and so much more. Rachel Turnbow is the MEIP Disaster Prevention Coordinator with Montana Legal Services Association. Hey, Rachel.
Hi. And I should say, I'm not an attorney, just so everyone knows. The other two are.
Okay. You and me are the non-attorneys on this call.
Non-attorneys.
Megan DeShong is a staff attorney for the Montana Legal Services Association, same organization. Hey, Megan.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You bet. And then Moses Okeyo is the consulting attorney for Partnership Health Center's Medical Legal Partnership, which is a program we're really excited about. Hey, Moses.
Hey, Eric, you're practically an attorney. You grew up with all attorneys in your house.
That's true. That's true. Well, I get beaten arguments by my girlfriend all the time, so I don't think I qualify. But we're glad to have you all on here today. I'd like to start by inviting Rachel and Megan to describe sort of what the Montana Legal Services Association does and what your roles are there.
Sure. So my job is that I coordinate the Montana Eviction and Intervention Program with Montana Legal Services Association. We started this program with funding that we got during the pandemic, and we actually have money where we can contract with private attorneys to offer advice and legal representation to folks facing eviction. So I'm fairly new to Montana Legal Services. We offer civil legal aid to folks who qualify throughout Montana. We have a lot of different forms and different resources available, but I'll let Megan fill that in a little more since I'm sort of the newbie.
Hi, Megan Dishong. I'm a staff attorney with Legal Services. I also work on a medical legal partnership project within Legal Services, not the same one that Moses does. Montana Legal Services has a medical legal partnership with Providence, and we take patient and client referrals through there, although we certainly coordinate with the folks at Partnership and I think have a lot of patient and client overlap from time to time. I take cases on a wide range of civil legal needs, from family law to debt to a lot of housing right now. And I also consult with people and advise on employment-related issues, which, as you can imagine, during the pandemic, we've seen a lot of. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating what Rachel said. The best resource that we have for people to find information, to find legal information and get connected with legal services, is montanalawhelp.org. And that has any of the things that Rachel and I will talk about today. You could find that information and more there. And forms and fillable forms that you can use if you're representing yourself.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I just put that website up there. Do I have that right, Megan? montanalawhelp.org.
Yes, thank you.
Beautiful. Wonderful. And then Moses, you're up. What do you do for Partnership Health Center and the Medical Legal Partnership?
My name is Moses Okeyo. I was charged with piloting a medical legal partnership at Partnership Health Center. And we're almost done with 1 year of getting the MLP piloted, and now we got a little grant and we embedded Melissa as a paralegal within Partnership, and we are providing legal services as part of the care that somebody receives when a patient walks into Partnership. So it's been a fantastic journey, and we are building the plane as we fly it, so to speak.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Moses. Moses is referring to Melissa Vawter, who is the Medical Legal Partnership Coordinator at Partnership Health Center. And as I understand it, the goal of medical legal partnerships embedded in community health centers like Partnership Health Center is to address the issue that is plain and simple, which is legal issues can get in the way of good health. We know that. And so we're working on addressing that integrated inside our own clinic, which is very exciting. So Rachel, I want to start with you. We're going to, our first prompt is Eviction Law 101, 5 steps to take if you receive eviction paperwork. Take it away. Whoopsie, you're muted. Classic.
Classic. Sorry about that, everyone. So if you receive eviction paperwork, it's very important that you read the paperwork and that you do what you need to do. Okay, you need to be able to say your piece and possibly have your day in court so that the judge can hear what you have to say about your case. So don't ignore it. The first thing you want to do is you want to read the court paperwork very carefully and figure out when your deadline to answer is. That can be a little confusing because it's usually a period of time where you have to take out weekend days and holidays. So pay attention to that. There's also some help on our website that Megan mentioned, montanalegalhelp.org, montanalawhelp.org, where you can get information about how to count those days. You can also visit that website to download and print and fill out free court forms to answer the lawsuit that you received. You need to make sure that you file that answer with the clerk of court and that you mail a copy of the paperwork that you file to your landlord. Any more information that you get about hearings or mediations, you need to make sure that you pay attention to those and that you attend them. And if you have any questions or you're confused or don't understand something, you can seek help. It's really good to talk to an attorney if you can. And we are going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about the resources that we have at MLSA to help you speak with an attorney.
And Rachel, do you mind if I pipe in and say a couple other things there?
Oh, please do.
I agree with everything Rachel said. I would also say that a lot of the time it can be obviously very stressful if you get eviction paperwork. And I think there's a tendency not to look at it right away, but often the deadlines for responding in eviction matters are much shorter and quicker. Often you have as little as 10 days to respond once you get an eviction lawsuit, and that's 10 business days. And it's not a lot of time. If you don't appear, you're at risk of having what's called a default entered against you. And that means the judge assumes that what the landlord says is correct and there's a judgment against you. It's much better to respond or seek legal help before that default's entered, because once that happens, the horse has sort of left the barn and you're in a much more difficult spot as far as responding to the court. You have much less leverage with your landlord to say discuss. And I think what Alex mentioned earlier, keep communicating with your landlord, even if you've gotten eviction notice, and say, look, I've got this lawsuit. I need a couple more weeks. You can always try to discuss a resolution with them, but the important thing to do there is that you must engage in the court process, and you just must continue to stay engaged and not just kind of sweep it under the rug because it's not going away.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that, Megan. That's a very important point. And we're here to help. So pay attention when we talk about those resources and how to reach us. Moses is going to talk to us about illegal landlord activities next.
Yeah, even before you get evicted, usually the landlord sends you a notice, and a notice to vacate is not the same thing as eviction papers. So a lot of people don't know the difference. A tenant called me the other day in a panic. The landlord sent him a text saying, tenant, you're being evicted. So I had to walk him through the process of what an eviction notice is and the 5 steps of eviction. So my first point is a landlord cannot evict you without giving you adequate notice and sufficient time, so 30-day notice. A landlord cannot prevent you from entering your rental property. A landlord cannot change locks without your permission. Also, it goes without saying that Montana law forbids you, the tenant, from changing the locks without the landlord's permission. So both parties must get each other's permission if they want to change locks. A landlord cannot retaliate against you when you make a complaint. Say you go to the county and say the landlord has violated some health and safety codes, or the landlord is not making repairs, or you send a landlord a letter saying they need to make repairs, or you join a tenant union. The landlord cannot abruptly change your locks without warning, as they could be found guilty of retaliatory eviction. They could also, a court could find them guilty of trespassing and burglary. So the landlord can't turn off utilities or turn off electricity, especially during winter months. So if within 6 months of you making a complaint against the landlord, they increase the rent or they decrease services at your rental or threaten to file a lawsuit against you, a court could assume that the landlord is retaliating against you for making the complaint. So as Alex was mentioning earlier, certain repairs must be made by the landlord. So a landlord cannot forgo making these repairs and force the tenant to do their own repairs. I got a call about a year ago from one of the staff from Partnership. A tree had damaged a roof in the rental property where they were staying, and the landlord wasn't making the repairs. So coached the client through how to request the landlord to fix the roof, and the client made a request in writing, and the landlord promptly fixed the roof. So, and then another thing, a landlord cannot neglect to keep common areas clean and safe. A landlord cannot neglect disclosing certain conditions of the property. So if there's lead-based paint or asbestos or mold in the house, the landlord must tell you that. A landlord cannot neglect to put a smoke detector that works in your unit. So a landlord can't violate your rights as tenants if you're considered a protected class. Say you need your service dog, a landlord must allow you to have your service dog. A landlord can't remove your personal belongings if you ignore the notice to vacate. A landlord can't just come in and throw your stuff in the street if you haven't paid rent. Several years back, a lady called me up and said she got behind, she hadn't paid rent for 2 months, and her landlord had changed the locks and helped himself to her TV and other stuff. Her mother's ashes were missing. And so she had gone to the cops, and the cops told her to go and get her things from the landlord. So she got to try and get her things from the landlord, and the landlord pointed a double-barreled shotgun at her and her child. And so I helped her navigate through that, and the landlord ended up in jail. So short of it, a landlord can't remove your stuff, help himself to your stuff, and throw your stuff in the street. And then a landlord can't enter your home without proper notice. So in Montana, the landlord must give you 24-hour notice. Some leases might increase or decrease that time. And the common questions I've been receiving is, can a landlord do a random inspection? So a lot of people wonder if a landlord can enter your home without permission. And of course, the answer to that is no. A landlord must inform you beforehand in writing if they need to come to the property. Of course, there are certain exceptions. If there's an emergency, maybe a fire, leak, water leak, a landlord might be able to enter without giving you notice in those emergency situations. But a landlord must give you proper notice if they wish to come in and repair, or if they wish to come in and do a routine inspection of the fire extinguisher and the like, or if they need to show the house to future tenants, you must be given proper notice. A landlord, the law allows you a right to quiet enjoyment of your property. So landlords who frequently make unnecessary and unannounced visits to the property, landlords are forbidden from just making unnecessary and unannounced visits to come and inspect. one of the callers I talked to, the landlord would come in and take water hoses from the tenant and irrigate the yard without permission. And so we had to have a conversation about that. And when you move, the landlord must provide you with the necessary notice. So a landlord can't just take your deposit. The law requires the landlord to give you an itemized list of all the damages and all the cleaning charges within 30 days of ending the lease. Like Alex was describing this, there might be some cleaning charges, but the landlord must provide you within 30 days of the end of your lease an itemized list of the damages and the cleaning charges. And then if a landlord takes your deposit without providing you without following the proper procedure for deducting and cleaning, you might be entitled to, you might win a suit in court. With that, I'll pass on to Rachel. No, is it Megan?
Yeah, we're going to go to Megan. I'll just hop in really quickly and say that thank you to a few Facebook Live viewers. We've got a few great questions coming in, so we'll save those for the end of this sort of section presentation. And with that, we will turn it over to Megan DeShung to address the renters' protections because of COVID-19.
Yeah, thank you. And just sort of add one more thing to, or not add, but piggyback on what Moses was saying. When the landlord, say, has wrongfully withheld your security deposit or has failed to repair while you were living there, and then they've also maybe filed an eviction lawsuit, absolutely that's the time for you to raise those claims when you're answering. You have the right and the opportunity, and in fact, that's probably your only opportunity to roll all the claims related to that tenancy into that and make what's called a counterclaim. And you say, well, my landlord says he wants to evict me, but he did some stuff wrong too. And that's your opportunity to respond there and raise all those claims to relate to that. So make sure any griefs you've got, that's the time to air them. So I just want to talk a little bit about some additional protections that have been put in place both at the state and federal level because of COVID-19. This is a shifting landscape. It's changed literally in the last 5 days, I think, based on additional executive actions at the state and federal level, court cases. So it's a shifting landscape. I'd encourage you to check our Facebook site at Legal Services or Montana Law Help as you go if anything comes up, because we regularly post updates on there when there are legal changes. The first and probably the most important protection I want to talk about is the CDC's moratorium against evictions. This was initially put in place last September, I believe, and has been extended now through executive action currently through June 30th. It protects you against eviction for non-payment of rent. It's not an across-the-board protection on eviction, and protects you through June 30th. You still continue to owe back rent that you haven't paid. But there are five different criteria you have to meet. There's a declaration on our website, on the CDC's website, that you can fill out. You have to be under a certain income. You can't make full rent. You're making best efforts to make partial payments of rent. And eviction would likely make you homeless. I feel like I've forgot. Oh, and you've used best efforts to obtain government assistance for rent. So applying for the Montana Emergency Rental Assistance Program that I believe Alex mentioned earlier. You fill out this declaration, you give it to your landlord. They should accept that means you're protected. We have seen landlords continuing to file evictions even when tenants have supplied that because they think it doesn't apply or they don't think the CDC order is in force or what have you. But then you can litigate that in the course of the eviction. So the CDC order is one where we've continued to see a lot of litigation nationwide from landlords and landlord representative groups. The most recent decision, which you may have heard about, I think it was in the news a bit, was a case out of DC last week, I think, and the district court judge invalidated the order, said the CDC exceeded its authority and that it doesn't apply. And I think what I've heard anecdotally is we have some attorneys for landlords in Montana now saying, we don't think this applies anymore. Federal Department of Justice is defending the CDC's position here. They asked the judge to stay that decision, to put a halt on it, and to leave the CDC order in place. The judge granted what's called an administrative stay and just sort of pushes a pause on that while the judge considers their motion to stay. If that's, which I think is a decision is expected on May 17th. If that is denied, then I suspect that Department of Justice will ask the appeals court, the next level up, to stay that. In the meantime, I think we're in a bit of a gray area. I absolutely 100% would continue to argue that the CDC moratorium applies. No court that controls in Montana has invalidated it, and I think we should still be arguing that it applies here. The next protection, and this one I think is even grayer, whether it still applies. Last spring, Governor Bullock put in place a directive to protect Montanans who are behind on rent, suffering financial hardship, and are vulnerable in some way to COVID. In February, Governor Gianforte issued an executive order rescinding all of Governor Bullock's COVID-related directives, although he did, and then it went on to address several specific issues such as the mask mandate, reopening of bars and restaurants and that sort of thing. It didn't specifically address the housing issues at all, or the rental protections. So, but it says it rescinds his prior orders. So I think you can, with a straight face, argue that that still applies, but I also think it's a much stronger argument to say that you're covered under the CDC moratorium. And I'm not sure, honestly, because I don't think any court has decided whether they would consider that to still be in place. I think it's probably a reach. But I want you to know it's out there as a fallback position. The paperwork to invoke that protection is on our website. And then the last protection I wanted to talk about is some additional protections for certain rentals that were put in place by the CARES Act last year. And this applies to kind of a narrow subset of rentals. If you reside in a federally covered property, you receive some limited protection. So that includes where landlords receive federal funding or subsidies. So if there's HUD funding, if you have a housing choice voucher, if it's a Section 8 property, I think there are some other USDA funded properties. If you reside in one of those and your landlord wants to evict you for non-payment, you have to have a 30-day notice instead of the shorter notice periods that you otherwise get for non-payment under Montana law. It doesn't mean they can't necessarily evict you, it's just you get a little bit more notice. There are some limitations, I believe, on additional fees or penalties for non-payment of rent. I believe the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, which is linked on our website, has a searchable map and database if you're not sure if your home is covered by the CARES Act. I believe, so those are the main protections, additional protections we have in place. The CDC order currently expires June 30th. It's been extended several times. We just don't know if it's going to be extended after that. Your guess is as good as mine. I'm really not sure if the administration will extend it again. It may depend in part what happens with the litigation going forward, but at least for the next almost 2 months, it's still there and currently in force, in my view. And I think with that, I would hand it back to Rachel.
Megan, can I just ask really fast? It sounds like there's a lot of information there, a lot of variables at play. It sounds like things are really shifting pretty quickly. Yes. So if someone is listening to this and saying, gosh, I think this might apply to me, but I'm not sure, and they just want an action step, a number they can call, a website they can visit, where can we point them so they can start to untangle this?
So I would be a broken record and again point them back to montanalawhelp.org, which has a COVID housing specific page. If it's on our front page, and if you either go into the COVID link or the housing link, which is right at the top of all the subject lists on the front page of that. It will run through everything I just ran through. I know that was a lot of information I just kind of dumped on people, but it's all there.
Well, that's the beauty of YouTube, right? Is we can go back and play it over again to make sure we understand all the bits and pieces. So, wonderful. And with that, we'll turn it over to Rachel to talk about having your day in court.
Hey, thank you very much, Megan. I just wanted to mention one more thing, and you please kind of reiterate or help with this. One other thing I think that's covered under federally covered is if a landlord has a federally backed loan, which actually could, like if they had a rural development loan or an FHA loan, it could open it up to more properties, although it would be pretty hard to maybe find out in some cases. Is that right?
Some of those, for example, fall under the USDA loans because those are like farm service agency loan type thing. Right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And there again, I would point people to the lookup. Property lookup that's linked on our website if you're not sure.
Yeah, I would just really encourage people to use that because I think we have found that quite a lot of them can be covered, and a lot of landlords are realizing that they need to give that 30-day notice. So that's been helpful for a lot of people. I think.
30 days doesn't solve your problem, obviously, but it turns the temperature down from huge crisis to stressful situation, right? So if you can turn that stress level down a little bit and give yourself time to get another plan in place, that often makes a lot of difference.
Definitely. So I'm going to talk just for a minute about having your day in court. So again, as we have mentioned several times, montanalawhelp.org is a wonderful resource. We have a free interactive tool that can help you represent yourself in court. So if you go to our website and go to that housing section that Megan just mentioned and go to evictions, and scroll down, you'll see a link that says the Law Helper, and that interactive tool can help you to sort of navigate that whole process. And I'm going to tell you again, this is available on Montana Law Help as well. We have some tips there for representing yourself in court. And these are just some really helpful tips in general, whether it's an eviction lawsuit or any kind of lawsuit that you might be facing. It's important to follow these guidelines as a general rule. So show up at least 15 minutes early. You want to dress when you're going to court like you're going to an important job interview. You always want to address the judge as your honor or as judge. Show a lot of respect for everyone. This can be hard, of course, when you're there and maybe you're facing a lawsuit and being evicted or sued. And that other party is there and you have a big disagreement with them, but just be very respectful to the other party, to the judge, and to the court staff and the other people in the courtroom. Bring all of the documents that you filed and that the other party filed, and make sure that your papers are well organized so you don't have to dig through them when you're standing there and talking. Bring all your evidence and also make sure that that's organized really well. It can make it so much more stressful if you have to dig around through your papers to find things that you want to show to the judge. Make sure that you have copies for yourself, for the court, and for the other side if you want the judge to look at those as evidence. Bring an outline of what you want to say, and you can also bring questions that you want to ask the other party in the court. Don't bring your children to court unless for some reason the judge ordered that your children be in court. Always wait your turn to speak and don't interrupt anyone, especially not the judge or the other party. When it is your turn to speak, make sure that the judge and the other party can really understand you. You definitely won't get what you want if the judge can't understand or hear what you're saying. If you don't understand something that's going on, just ask. You have a right to ask for more information so that you can understand. Hearings can be stressful, so just be as respectful as you can in that process. And definitely make sure that before you leave the courtroom or the courthouse that you understand what your next steps are or what you're required to do. Does anyone have anything else that they want to add to that?
Thank you for that, Rachel. And there is a video that I think it wasn't MLSA, but it's the Montana Supreme Court has some resource video that walks through exactly what you just said. And we had a client a few weeks ago that nobody else wanted to take his case, and so we had to walk him through how to have your day in court. So we said, look at this video. We played it to him several times, and then we helped him organize his exhibits. Helped him. There's a section on how to submit an exhibit to the judge, so that having sufficient amount of copies, so that you can give it to the opposing party. You can give the judge a copy, and even how to talk to the judge. Address the judge as Your Honor. Don't just start saying yo. So that video is a good resource that anybody who's going to represent themselves in court should have. I think we'll post that with the video of this presentation, the website to that, the link to that 10-minute video.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, Moses. I think that we have a link to that on our YouTube site, so we'll make sure that we post that for everyone.
I also think if you are representing yourself, don't feel like you have to use legal terms or be like a lawyer. The judge knows you're not. And in fact, you probably would be in justice court if you were an eviction lawsuit. And a large percentage of people who appear in justice court aren't lawyers, and that's fine. The important thing is to be clear about the facts, be respectful, and ask questions if you don't understand the process. Because for the most part, the justices of the peace really do want to be fair and give you a chance to have your say, and they're not expecting you to sort of be a lawyer when you're in there, and that's fine. You just have to do your best to convey the information that you have that explains your position.
And what Rachel said is key. Rachel said, if you have an outline, I would even recommend typing out what you're going to say in case your things go out the window when you start speaking. You can say, Your Honor, now I can't speak, but I will read what I have prepared. And they'll let you do that. So
lawyers do that. We make the list of things we need to say. So you should definitely do that. It will help keep you focused on what you need to say and make sure that one important thing doesn't just slip out of your mind.
And so this client we helped with this case. When he went to court, the other party says he owes them $100,000, and then he says, Your Honor, in this account is only 60. Here is the paperwork, and he felt really empowered when he could just present his papers and make sense, and everybody was listening. He says, oh wow, everybody was listening to me. I was making sense, though the other party was represented by an attorney. So it's really important to be a little bit of steps to prepare yourself, and a little bit of steps to prepare your exhibits, and what you're going to say goes a long way. And you get credibility too from the judge and from the other side as well. If you're making sense and you're not calling the other person, oh, they're just a liar, If you have your exhibit, you say, Your Honor, this exhibit says the value is 60,000, not 100.
Definitely, those are really, really great points.
I'll just jump in really quick and say, and I know we have, you're going to speak about eviction-related notices. We have about 15 minutes left and one more presenter, and there's also some great comments or questions rather submitted by our viewers. So I just want to make sure we get to those. So you're up, Megan. Thanks. Oh, excuse me, Rachel, pardon me.
Rachel, yeah, I think we were going to speak about resources.
Mm-hmm.
So as we have said 100 times, we really encourage you to go to montanalawhelp.org. You can find out how to apply for Montana Legal Services assistance through that website. There's also a lot of forms and self-help law assistance there. So MLSA gives free civil, non-criminal legal help to eligible clients, and you can apply at that website, montanalawhelp.org. I also wanted to point out the State Bar Law Referral Service may give you contact information for attorneys who provide for a fee the type of assistance that you're seeking. And you can contact the State Bar Lawyer Referral Service at montanabar.org.
And the only other one I would mention that I think Alex mentioned already is 211, which you can call or go to their website, and there's lots of resources there. I think that probably links to the emergency rental and just general housing resources for when you're in kind of an emergency situation or looking for housing or need other assistance.
The Montana Supreme Court also has some sections on their website for pro se litigants. So that's always a helpful spot to begin your search for information. And Partnership Health has our MLP. If you are a patient at Partnership, legal services can be provided as part of your care that you will receive.
That's all really great information. Thank you so much to this group. And we're excited to bring you back in for the Q&A here shortly. But with that, I'm going to pull you all off the screen and welcome our next guest, who is Lisa Sirois with Partnership Health Center. So just to remind our audience, we're speaking to local experts about eviction, renters' rights, and housing-related resources across Missoula. And again, our next expert guest is Lisa Sirois. She's a housing navigator here at Partnership Health Center. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. I'll keep my portion fairly brief. As Eric said, I'm a housing navigator here at Partnership Health Center. I work primarily with individuals experiencing literal homelessness here in Missoula, particularly chronic homelessness, so folks who have been unhoused for years, sometimes decades even. And I've also just been working within this system in Missoula since 2015 and have a general idea of the landscape. So I'm just here to kind of talk a little bit about resources for if you do find yourself in a houseless situation. So I have this visual up here that identifies kind of the main spots in town, I would say. So we have the Poverello Center in town is our emergency shelter for adults. The YWCA just opened their new family housing center, which serves families. And it's just an amazing resource for our community. When I say just, I mean a week ago, or maybe even this week, they've opened their doors. The Salvation Army is another spot in town that can kind of provide resource support and just information. And looking back or reporting back 211, again, I think a lot of us have mentioned this. If you're kind of lost and don't know where to go, that's a great first call for help is kind of the phrase they use to just get started and figure out what direction to go in. And I also included 549 Hope down here. They're definitely a little bit more flexible. In this field, we really try to be creative and in our solutions that we find for folks because everyone's situation is different. And 549 Hope is a great resource for those creative solutions as well. Lastly, I just want to mention the Missoula Coordinated Entry System, which is what I work within as well. It's a resource that helps prioritize housing resources for folks experiencing homelessness. These resources are things like housing vouchers or just other shorter term rental assistance. Just in place to help connect the most vulnerable individuals to these resources. Access points are at the Poverello Center and via 211, so you can just call in to learn more about that resource in the community. There's also several partners who are unadvertised that are connected to the system. And really the greatest asset for that is just the community sharing we're able to do within that group of organizations. If someone's kind of lost and doesn't know where to go, they can connect to another provider who is an expert in that matter and get the individual connected with them as well. So yeah, that's kind of all I'm sharing for now. I'm happy to revisit it later if helpful.
That's great, Lisa. Thank you so much. And with that, I will bring everybody back on, the whole gang, and an extra special guest is Melissa Vawter, who is the Medical Legal Partnership Coordinator right here at Partnership Health Center. She's just across the hall. Welcome on, Melissa. Oh, you're muted. Classic.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I was just saying thanks to all our speakers. I feel like, even doing this work that I've learned a lot in this past hour. So thank you. Excited to answer some questions.
Yeah, so Melissa's joining us for the Q&A. And so I'll start. We have a great question from Abby Barrow on Facebook. She said, are landlords required to give sufficient notice if they intend to renew a rental lease? So let's start with that question. Who wants to take that on?
I can jump on that sword. This is a problem I'm seeing across the board in Missoula right now because the rental market is so tight and property values are so high. Unfortunately, your landlord absolutely has the right not to renew your lease at the end of a lease term. I would check your lease to see if there's a particular notice period required. It's probably 30 days is my best guess. It's normal. I would say if you're on a month-to-month tenancy, say you've finished your initial 6-month term and you've been month-to-month since then, it's going to be a month termination. If you're week-to-week, it's a week. I think I would say it's rare in residential leases that I see more than 30-day. And they have the right to give you that notice, and you have to be out in 30 days or at the end of your lease. They can't kick you out before your lease term actually ends if there are no other violations. You also, as Moses said earlier, have the right to stay until they have an actual eviction order. They can't lock you out. You're potentially exposing yourself to more damages, but if you literally don't have somewhere to go on day 31, staying in your house is the lesser of two evils, I would say. And I think that's when it comes to trying to negotiate, hey, I just can't find a rental right now. Can you give me a couple more weeks? Can you give me another month? And just on a practical perspective, by the time they go get an eviction order, you might have found a place, so they might be willing to work with you and give you a little bit more time. I know that's not a perfect answer. If someone else has a perfect solution,
just to piggyback off that question, I had somebody ask me, I'm thinking that it's a similar situation, but if the landlord's wanting to sell a property and tear down the property, like the residence, is this a similar type situation, or what do you think about that kind of situation?
I think, well, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I would punt to anyone else.
Well, you can finish your thought and then we can jump on it.
No, I think it's the same thing.
Yeah,
if you're at the end of your lease, what do you get? Or if you're on a month-to-month lease, they unfortunately have the right to do that.
So I would say you need to contact somebody, an attorney, and depending on your goals, you say, I have nowhere else to go. So then the situation is different than, I want to move anyway. Or so usually you can negotiate with the landlord to give you more time, like Megan was alluding to. Sometimes the problem is you just want enough time so you can find some other place to move. So then, with that in mind, you can do some fine negotiations so that you get more time. But sometimes, so it depends on what you want to do as the tenant and what your goals are. Then the answer becomes different. So in the case I think nowadays the landlords in a lot of communities, especially in Missoula, some of them are just using that ploy. They're saying we want to sell our property or we want to tear down the place. So you have to figure out, is it true that they want to really tear down the place, or is it another ploy that they have been using? Because those are the most effective ways of getting rid of somebody. If you say, I'm going to sell my house, even if you're not selling it, they'll try to get you out of there in that way.
On the other side, too, never underestimate the power of being proactive if you're not sure where you stand. About 60 days before my partner and I's lease ran out, we emailed our landlord. We have a good relationship with them, and we just asked, are you selling or not? Thankfully, they're not, and we signed another lease. But, you know, this is a really scary time right now. And if this is something that you're worried about, ask.
Yes.
Right, because in this situation, particularly given the current negative vacancy rate in Missoula, the more time you have to find a place, the better you are, and you're just trying to buy yourself really just time and leverage and space to get done what you need to get done.
0.94%.
So
I just wanted
exact.
to jump in and say one thing with the specific question about tearing a building down. They still need to go through the eviction process. It's not that just because a building's getting torn down, they can just tell you to leave. So just remember that as well.
No, I can't think of any situation, even up to criminal conduct on a premises, where the landlord can show up and lock you out. They can't. In that case, they can get a quick turnaround on it, but they cannot just show up and lock you out ever, basically, for a terminate. They must always have what's called it's usually called a writ of possession from a court that allows them to take possession of the premises, and the sheriff will come and knock on your door. Your goal at all times should be to avoid that moment. You know, another thing we haven't mentioned in talking about evictions, a practical thing to keep in mind if there's an eviction pending against you. My goal with my clients is always to avoid a judgment whenever possible, because then you're going to have that judgment hanging out there, and it's going to show up on your credit report. It's going to show up when other landlords check in the future, and it's going to make it harder for you to get housing down the road. So that's why it's worth it, if you're in an unfortunate situation where you're going to lose your housing, to reach some negotiated resolution whenever possible and avoid a judgment, because you're protecting you're doing your future self a favor.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I've seen it happen a few times now where somebody was served with eviction paperwork, and in the process of responding to that, they were able to meet with the landlord and do mediation, and it bought them some extra time. So, I mean, it's just kind of amazing. Like, make sure you're responding to that paperwork. Otherwise, you're going to get that default judgment and kind of out of, don't have as many options at that point.
I like what you're saying, Melissa. We have to also still clarify. I think the notice is not eviction. The notice you get doesn't do anything. The actual complaint that's filed in court is the lawsuit. So a lot of people, when they get a notice to vacate, they get all excited. And so then they assume they're being evicted. So a lot of people don't know the difference between what the notice is and what the complaint is. And then they just want to leave.
And the mediation that Melissa mentioned, you can often, a justice court will require mediation before an actual eviction hearing, and you can always request that too if you're representing yourself, and often that will resolve the case. You'll reach a negotiated move out date usually. I think there was another question there about whether any laws that require landlords to pay tenants for move out, and not that I'm aware of. If anyone else is aware of that, I would love to know about it.
I just wanted to say that the Emergency Housing Assistance Program is able to help with moving expenses, though, which is very, very helpful now at this time. Although we know that the housing market, it can be so hard to find a place, but if you are legally evicted and you're working with that program, they can help with moving. And I believe first month's rent and deposit. So.
That's great information, everybody. Is there any part of Abby's question below that you feel like we haven't addressed?
Yeah, I'm wondering about if you can't find an alternate rental, I mean, just kind of talking about like housing resources that are available.
And then you see Lisa.
I mean,
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's a really tough market right now. And something I forgot to mention when I was talking is in my field anyways, homelessness response, we really encourage folks to utilize their existing support systems if they have those in place. So it might mean connecting with family or friends, coworkers, again, getting creative until you can find a rental that works for you.
That's fantastic. Great. Thanks so much, everybody. And then we'll move on to this great question from Jen. What are persons' rights when their lease is not being renewed based off her neighbors make complaints about noise during quiet hours? Who wants to take that on? All right. We can always point. Go ahead. Yep.
I feel like I've been jumping in on all the questions, but I think there's a difference there. It depends on whether it's eviction complaint for violations of your lease, say for disturbing your neighbors, or if it's a non-renewal, just they're not renewing your lease. And often landlords will just wait out the lease term and then terminate you, because then they don't have to prove anything about what your kids did or didn't do. They just give you 30 days and that's that. If they've given you a notice violation that you're violating terms of the lease or homeowners association policies or what have you, that's different. They have to actually, if you guys don't negotiate a resolution, they have to actually prove those violations in an eviction hearing. But if it's just based on your lease is up and you're kind of I think you're a pain, or the neighbor says you are, and so we're not renewing, you're still in the same boat that we were talking about before.
Awesome. So we'll move on to the next question. If a landlord, this is from Blaine, if a landlord is informing tenants that they must move out because they are demoing the building, is that considered an eviction or a termination? And what does the coverage under the CDC protection look like as it relates to that?
I think we kind of mentioned, kind of answered this one already, but just to reiterate, if they're demolishing the building, they still need to take all the steps to evict you. They can't just have eviction. As it stands right now would still.
so would it maybe what Megan was just talking about too, if the lease happened to be up though, would that be considered a termination, or either way thinking you'd still have to go the route of eviction? Does that make sense? That question.
Even if the lease is up, they still have to, and you don't leave at the end of the notice period they've given you, they still have to file an eviction lawsuit. I mean, Moses, would you agree from an attorney perspective?
Yeah, so this is the question. It doesn't matter for me what the lease says. Okay, so you say you want to demo your building. I say I don't want to move. I'm sitting here and I don't have anywhere else to go. Come and get me out. You can't come and lock the door. You can't come and move my stuff out. You have to find some legal avenue of getting me out of your house. And that's the only thing we're saying is you have to get an eviction from the court.
As far as the CDC protections, that only applies if there's an issue of non-payment of rent, if you're behind on your rent and have not been able to pay your rent. So I think it probably would not apply here, depending on the circumstances.
Mm-hmm. And then it looks like the final question that we have on social media is, what if you can't afford an attorney?
Well, you've come to the right place. You got MLSA over here. You got, like we said before, if you show up to Partnership Health for your health checkup, you can get some legal services there at no cost to you. And you can, if you qualify, I guess I'll let the MLSA folks speak for themselves.
Yeah, so a lot of our MLSA programs are based on income, but I just want to point out that the MEET program is not. So that's our Montana Eviction Intervention Program, and that's the funding that we have received during the pandemic to help tenants who are facing eviction. So again, go to montanalawhelp.org. You can find out how to apply for our services. And for specifically for that program, it's not based on your income.
Yeah, and again, looking at that montanalawhelp.org, there are so many self-help resources as well. Definitely be applying for services, seeking an attorney or assistance through Partnerships MLP program, but also just to know there's a lot of different resources on there and a lot of how-tos. Most of what we discussed today is on there as well. So if you want to educate yourself some more, or just kind of find out, okay, where do I get the paperwork for, I need to answer this complaint. Where do I find the answer to the complaint? Okay, I'm going to go on here and here's the form, print it out, and there's step-by-step instructions. So that can be a great opportunity or great option as well.
Yeah, and I think Rachel had mentioned the state bar has some reduced, what do they call that? Reduced fee situations where you can get reduced charge, an attorney can answer your questions too. And also, like Melissa was alluding to, there's a bunch of self-help resources that we've mentioned here. And so you can always do that yourself with a little bit of help from all these resources we are pointing you to.
That's all really good information. We've managed to make it through all the questions. Thanks so much to our viewers for submitting those. I would welcome any of our expert guests to provide any imparting words as we finish up the conversation.
I have a clarifying question for the legal experts. A lot of the folks I serve will tell me, oh, I've been evicted. I have an eviction on my record. And I always clarify and ask, okay, did you go to court? And in my experience, if you didn't go through a court proceeding, it is not an eviction, it is a termination. Is that correct? Or would you have different information or advice for folks?
I think what you're saying is they're saying they had an eviction and they just got, which I think Moses has mentioned several times, a notice of termination, and their landlord sort of kicked them out and they thought they had to leave. As long as there's no court action, there's no judgment, that's not on a record anywhere. There could have been a default they didn't know about. But even when you have a judgment, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to get housing. It just means you might be a little tough.
Cool.
Yeah.
Go for it, Moses.
Yeah. So usually you can look for yourself and see if there's any civil actions against you, and then if it's an eviction, it will show up. It will show up in your record. But if it doesn't show up, means you're not taken to court. And so a lot of people assume when they get a notice of eviction, then they've been evicted. It's like, I'm being indicted, and it's not the same thing.
Thank you. Yeah, when folks go to apply for new opportunities, that question is asked. And I always like to make sure they know, hey, don't check that box unless you know for sure that that's on your record. And yeah, so just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I always, I've done this with patients a few times, just called the courts, like, was it in Missoula? Where were you living? Called the courts, find out, does the court have anything, yes or no? You can kind of get your answer pretty easily from there too. Cool.
I think the departing words that I really have right now is if you do find yourself having to look for a new home, right now with how tight the housing market is, it really has become sort of a foot race to who can get their materials and applications and everything in first. And the other thing I like to point, so making sure to have all that information ready to go when you turn in the application. And then the other part too is I recommend cover letters. whether or not the landlord reads it or not, email the landlord or staple a cover letter to your application. When you turn in an application that just has your name and all your information, and they do that background check and they run that credit check, then that landlord gets to tell your story for you. But if you take the time to tell your story to the landlord, any sort of barrier or obstacle that you've ever faced in the past, how you've resolved that issue or how you've moved past that issue can be unbelievably powerful in a time like this when there's really not that much housing available.
That's great advice. Thanks, Alex.
Does anybody else want to chime in before we sign off?
I just want to put out there, thanks everyone for viewing. And if you do have any questions come up or you're wondering more about any of the great resources that we talked about, you can always check out the website, but also you can reach out on our Facebook page and you'll be connected with me, and then I can help refer you to whoever it is that you're wanting to talk to and help get you to that resource. So thank you.
Yeah, I think this was fun. Thank you all for sparing an hour of your afternoon to come and talk with us. And I think I learned a lot from all of you, and I had a little bit of fun while I was learning.
Me too.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
If you're looking forward to any other resources, if you'd like to see some great expert conversations convened on Facebook Live in the future, just let us know. You can message us on Facebook or on Instagram. We'd sure love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening in. And with that, we'll sign off. Thanks to all our expert guests as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening.